morning's passage comes from St. John. And as I worked through it this week, and I even worked through all that was going on with it, and I don't know that for those of you who come here and see the titles of my messages, sometimes you can leave and think, well, what in the world was that title? That's a good question. I don't know. Something I had to come up with to put up there. I don't know. I'm terrible at getting titles. But this week's one is Reckless Love. And even as I was beginning to work through it and even look at all that was going on, reminded that when we actually come to church, the last thing you would expect to hear, I think we think we come to church so that we'll be less reckless. And the more I engaged this text, the more I think that with Jesus, our lives should probably be a lot more adventurous than they are. They probably should be a lot more chaotic in the good sense that you don't know what's coming next and where it is going. But Jesus came, and what he did was reckless in the world's eyes. Foolish, we learned a couple of weeks ago. And in doing so, I think there's a bit of recklessness that we are called to participate in that would be joyous and fun and crazy. And yes, it would be labeled reckless. And we're going to talk about that even as we work through the story from St. John. Am I not on? I don't feel like I'm booming. I am on up here. So, okay. I actually think I hear myself a little bit. It is. It's Jesus. All right, I'm going to switch to Lori's mic, because my throat is sore today, so I'm not going to try to talk loud. We were having problems before the service, and we got it to work, and then it didn't work anymore. So it's okay, because Jesus saves.
So does Noah.
Oh, we just think it's the cord. Okay. All right. All right, I'm going to start reading from John as we begin today. John chapter 12. I'm going to start from 19. Jesus has just raised Lazarus, and that was quite a miracle that Jesus did. And I felt like this text, as we read it, was helped by verse 19. So the Pharisees took one look and threw up their hands and said, "This is out of our control. The world's in a stampede after Jesus." And what do we have in the next verse? Well, there were some Greeks, which were Gentiles, pagans in town, who had come to worship at the feast. And they approached Philip, who was from Bethsaida in Galilee, and they said, "Sir, we want to see Jesus. Can you help us?" Philip went and told Andrew, and Andrew and Philip together told Jesus. And Jesus answered, "Time's up. The time has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. Listen carefully. Unless a grain of wheat is buried in the ground, dead to the world, it is never more than a grain of wheat. But if it is buried, it sprouts and reproduces itself many times over." That's a key part I'm going to come back to, because it is buried, it sprouts and reproduces itself many times over. When it is buried, its reproduction literally is reckless. It is reckless. If you have modern versions, you will bear many fruits. There will be massive amounts of babies through this reckless love. That's really what it's literally saying. See, even Scripture is reckless, but we don't say it because then we couldn't sell Bibles if we were really wanting to talk about how reckless. But that's literally what it's saying. When the seed is buried in the ground, it produces life, and it is so reckless of life that it produces many, 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 many children. In the same way, anyone who holds on to his life, just as it is, destroys that life. But if you let it go, reckless in your love, you'll have it forever, real and eternal. If anyone wants to serve me, then follow me. Then you'll be where I am, ready to serve at a moment's notice. The Father will honor and reward anyone who serves me. Right now I am storm-tossed, and what am I going to say? Father, get me out of this? No, this is why I came in the first place. I'll say, Father, put your glory on. A voice then came, I glorified it, and I'll glorify it again. The listener, others said, an angel spoke to him. Jesus said, the voice didn't come for me, but for you, because at this moment the world is in crisis. Now Satan, the ruler of this world, will be thrown out. And I, as I am lifted up from the earth, will attract everyone to me and gather them around me. He put it this way to show how he was going to be put to death. The world had gone after Jesus. So much so that the religious didn't like it. But there were some Gentiles that were interested. There were some Gentiles that had heard. There were some Gentiles that no doubt had heard about Jesus raising Lazarus from the dead in chapter 11, and they wanted to know more. I think we will find out in this text even their motives, maybe in coming and asking. Jesus is going to redirect. But Jesus was sought after. Maybe for the wrong reasons, but he was sought after. And Gentiles come, those from outside the church community, those outside the covenant community, they come to Philip and they ask a question that anybody would love to hear asked. Sir, we would like to see Jesus. I think we learn a lot from that particular question. I think we learn a lot. I was musing about that even today, or even in this day in which we live. You know, I've been in ministry for a few years from now, and for a few years now, and hopefully for a few years from now, too, if you all have me. But in all of my years of ministry, and it is not uncommon to get a phone call. It is not uncommon for someone to stop in, and by the way, usually this is not from. It's very interesting, but it's because it's not from those who are typically unchurched or those who aren't part of a church. But we'll get the phone call or we'll have someone stop in and they want to know about Nature Coast Church. I'm always uneasy. If you know me, I'm always uneasy about those because immediately, and I don't, especially because I can tell they are churched. And by the way, this isn't a good thing. Immediately, I feel like I'm on trial, right? I'm on trial. Oh, I love people to come to Nature Coast. Well, more people come to Nature Coast. let me read them a little bit. I'm going to put on my little marketing cap here and think, well, you have kids. Are you a little bit older? I mean, what are your needs? What are those things? And so you put on this cap, and they're wanting to know. And the real kicker is what do you believe? And I think, oh my, the minute you ask that question, and I hate to be really honest, but the minute you ask that question, if one came through the door, I'm thinking they're never going to make it here. They're never going to make it here. But one thing that has not happened in all of my years of ministry is someone has made that phone call. Someone has stopped in and said, Pastor, if I came to Nature Coast, there's one thing I care about. Would I see Jesus there? No one ever asked that question. And in all of my years of ministry, in all of my years of speaking, and I've said this before, I can get emails, and have gotten emails. I can have someone ask to see me in the office because I said something wrong up here, because I did something wrong up here. But in all of my years of ministry, and usually they're upset and they're irate, but in all of my years of ministry, I've never had someone take me back into the office, grab me by the shirt, put me up against the wall, and say, Sir, we must see Jesus. No one's ever said that to me. Now, you may say, well, Brad, that's because you talk about Jesus a lot. And I do. But the reality is, in all of my years here, in all of the words that I have ever spoken, there have been times that I have brought honor and glory to Brad, or I brought honor and glory to Nature Coast. I have not been perfect in my years here at Nature Coast, and yet no one has said this past Sunday, you missed Jesus. And I've missed Jesus because I'm not perfect. Scripture's telling us something here. You know who does? I always say this. You know who really wants to see Jesus? And I wouldn't just say here. I would say that attends any particular church in any particular way. You know ones who are dying to see Jesus are the ones who have probably never stepped in church before and are here because they have a big fat hole in their heart and they're asking, where is Jesus? It's never the religious asking for Jesus. It's always the broken. And we're all broken. Every single one of us. Sir, we would see Jesus. And you would think Jesus is excited about that question. Philip goes getting Andrew. I don't know why Philip can't do it himself, but he goes and gets Andrew. And Andrew and Jesus, they go. The other thing, by the way, that they didn't ask, and you actually read it, is they didn't ask, Sir, we would like to find a church with this program. They didn't even ask that they wanted to know facts about. They didn't ask for information about Jesus. When you actually read it, they wanted to experience Jesus and his power and all of those things. And so you would think they'd be excited. So Andrew, he goes and gets Philip, and they go to Jesus. And you can go to the next slide. They go to Jesus, and Jesus ignores him. Philip went and told Andrew, and Philip told Jesus, and Jesus answered, time's up. Well, what kind of answer is that? Time's up. In our versions, it's the time is now at hand. If you have a King James Bible, the time is now at hand for the Son of Man to be glorified. Sir, we must see Jesus. Jesus, there are people here that want to see and experience you. Time's up. I mean, what kind of answer is that? And we're going to get to it in a moment, because he does answer this question not only for them, but for you and I in a very, very reckless way. Jesus says, time's up. But what he begins to do is he begins to answer, you want to see Jesus? Do you want to experience me? Do you want to follow me? Then listen carefully, he says. I'm going to tell a little parable. That unless a grain of wheat is buried in the ground, dead to the world, it is never more than a grain of wheat. But if it is buried, it sprouts and reproduces itself many times over. In the same way, anyone who holds on to his life, just as it destroys that life, but if you let it go reckless in your love, you'll have it forever, real, and eternal. He is beginning to answer the particular question, but he begins to answer the question in a particular way by asking, sir, you want to see Jesus? And he's basically saying, do you really want to ask that question? Do you really want to experience me? Do you really want to be a follower of me? Because here's the truth. And then he gives this thing that, the grain of wheat, in the other versions, it says when the grain of wheat is above the ground, it actually uses this word, because this contrasts the recklessness of it. If a grain of wheat remains above the ground, it remains alone, by itself. It's just a grain of wheat, but it's not just a grain of wheat. There's no life, there's loneliness, there's all of these realities. No matter what you are doing or how you are experiencing it, it just remains alone. There is no life, there's no life being produced from it. But if it is buried and dies, then something happens. Jesus says something interesting, and you go back to the prior slide. Anyone who holds on to life, just as it is, destroys that life. This is one of those passages that he says, unless you die, there's no life. These are the hard, difficult sayings of Jesus. What does Jesus mean? I think literally in this text, to the one who loves his ego, to the one who lusts for control, your and mine own attempts to save our own life will in fact not save it, but will destroy it. I know from my own experience that is true. I have a quote here from George Mueller. He was an evangelist in England during the 1800s. And I love this because as I have grown in my life, this has been true for me. And I thought it gives us an indication of what Jesus means here by letting go and dying. There was a day when I died, George Mueller is saying. I died to George Mueller. His opinions, his preferences, his tastes, and his will. I died to the world, its approvals, and its censures. And I didn't just die to the world, I died to the church. I died to the approval or blame even of my brothers and sisters and friends. I think that's what Jesus is getting at here. There was a day when I died. And to the extent that God has worked in my heart, for those of you who have been here over the years, there has been this need for life to be born out in Brad, or life to be born out even in Nature Coast through leadership or through myself, that there had to be a death to my own opinions, my own preferences, my own taste, my own will. There has to be a death, yes, to the world that may laugh at us, a death to the world that may censure us because we believe in this Jesus. But ultimately, one of the hardest places I ever had to die was die to the church and what the church thought of me. Because one of the things I realized as I was in this process of dying, and one of the things that you have to realize is that we will never produce life. We will be never reckless in our love. And this was true of me, I was living my life for other people. I was living according to their opinions. I was living according to what our denomination said or shouldn't say that I did. I was living under the expectations of what even the evangelical world in America said. And when you are doing that, you will never be alive. It will destroy you because it's not your life. You were not called to live a life that someone else expects you to live. Not a person in here was ever called to live a life that your mom wants you to live, or your dad wants you to live, or your friends want you to live, or your church wants you to live. We were not called to do that. In fact, I would go so far as to say is that every individual in this room is created in the image of God. And because you are created in the image of God, there is not a single person on this planet that is the same as you. Not one single person of the billions of people on this planet are you. You have been uniquely created. And because you are created in the image of God, it also means that you were meant to reveal God in a way that not one of the other billion people could ever reveal him. That is the good news of what Jesus is saying. And we will never be reckless. I mean, listen to what, should I do this? Should I do that? I don't know what so-and-so is going to think. I don't know what so-and-so, they're going to be mad if I do that. They're going to be upset. I'll just give you my life. They'll never come back to Nature Coast. That's real. That's real. They'll never come back. And there's no life. It is a wildly reckless place to be, because in the midst of that recklessness, here is the other thing that drives us. It drives me, it drives the church, it drives us in our lives, it drives us as parents, it drives us as spouses, and it all relates back to control. But here's how reckless this is. The minute you begin to ask yourself the question, am I right? Should I do that? Should we have communion should we have communion every Sunday? Should we have drums? Should we, the minute you begin to ask that question is the minute that you're dead. Because you're earning the wages of being right. And those wages will always lead to death, but the gift of God is life through Jesus Christ our Lord. Things will just get better. This is how we control our lives. Things will just get better if I do it. I screwed up in my marriage. I've screwed up with my children, and what do we immediately do?
When we screwed up, we go to more control.
In fact, that's why we come to church. You screwed up this week? Well, maybe the pastor will say something so that I can get better control of my life. Listen, you're here this morning so that you will lose control of your life and rest in the finished work of Christ. You hear this in our conversations. Last week, there was someone waiting to talk to me after church, and it was a visitor. And you never know how those conversations are going to go. And by the way, I say this because this is me. Maybe I'd be better off using my own life as an illustration, and maybe I'll get to that. But someone asked me how that conversation went, and it was interesting. When we engaged these conversations with each other, something had gone wrong in their life, and their reputation was at stake, and what others thought of them. And I don't know what it is about pastors, but it's like they need their reputation with me. And so you're going to hear the conversation, you're going to hear this, this, and this about me. You need to know it's not true. And I don't really care one way or the other whether it is true. But we all do that when the fires are burning and the reality is there that your reputation will be at stake. I mean, my whole calling's based upon my reputation. What if my reputation is ruined? Someone's got to my name. Someone's going to go out and go and tell the truth. Someone's got to go out. Otherwise, they're going to believe that about me, and they'll never come to Nature Coast. The reality is, whatever you hear about me out there, it's actually way worse than that. It is. I'm not lying. It is way worse than that. It's amazing that anyone comes up and listens to me at Nature Coast. It's way worse. And what we do in the midst of those conversations where we get on the phone, I can't believe they said that about me. Oh, the nerve of them. You're holding on to your life. And Jesus is saying, don't hold on to your life for dear sake. Let go of your life for your life's sake. You see, Jesus came and he had no reputation. Jesus is saying, do you wish to experience me? Then be willing to lose your reputation, because if you are a follower of me, you're going to serve me, you're going to be identified with me, and I am going to lose my reputation. So much so that the community with which he was from were the leading people who put him on the cross. You see, our conversations display, it's interesting because Jesus says, you can go back to the text, Jesus says, go to the next slide. Then you'll be where I am, ready to serve at a moment's notice. The Father will honor and reward anyone who serves me. This is kind of his beginning to his answer. He says, sir, we wish to see Jesus. And he says, well, do you really wish to see me? Because right now, this is Jesus talking, I am deeply troubled. My life is a storm toss. My life is a shipwreck. And it is heading toward a shipwreck. And what am I going to say? What am I going to do about this? My life is storm-tossed, Jesus is saying. My life is a shipwreck. My reputation is a mess. And what am I going to say? Father, get me out of this. Get me out of the storm. Get me out of the shipwreckness. Get me out of the suffering. Get my reputation back. Am I going to say, Father, will you get... that's what we do, right? Our lives are a mess. Our lives are storm-tossed. And what do? We get on our knees and we pray, Father, get me out of this. And Jesus says, no, that's not what I'm going to do. No, in the midst of the loss of reputation, in the midst of the storm, in the midst of it all, you glorify yourself. You glorify yourself. And how are you going to glorify yourself? You're going to glorify yourself because of this unending, undying, reckless love that you have for me. You see, we get in the midst of our storm-tossed lives, and the first thing we say in our prayers is, Father, get me out of this. And Jesus says, no, what we should pray is, Father, glorify your name in this. It is a radical difference. You see, so many times, and these are the things and these are the reasons people possibly don't come back. People come to me. Say, pray for me, my marriage is on the rocks. Pray for me. I need to get back together with my husband, or I need to get back together with my wife. And because I am getting older, and because I'm getting more reckless, and because I am probably getting more crazy and whatever, I actually don't say this. I said, well, I'm actually not going to pray for your marriage to get back together, because the goal is not the piece of paper. The goal is Christ. The goal is Christ. And see, that's the subtle difference. We are destroying ourselves, and we're actually destroying our marriages because the goal is the piece of paper. What I will pray is, in the midst of your storm, that God will be glorified in the storm. And it could be that God does not want your marriage to get better. He wants you to know Him. And that's why people walk out the door. But that is the truth. It's the truth. He wants us to know Him, because that is where His glory will be. It will be in the storm. It will be in the loss. You see, when I have those conversations where I feel the need to pick up the phone and call someone to save my reputation, I am robbing Christ of His glory and taking it upon myself. He says, I'll put the glory on display. You can go to the next slide. And a voice came out from the sky. It's the third time. So we have the baptism, we have the transfiguration in the Gospels, where the voice thunders from the sky. And this is the third time. A voice comes and thunders from the sky. Almighty, Jesus, I've already glorified it in the loss of your reputation. I've already glorified it, and I will glorify it again. And the listening crowd didn't really get it. Thunder, was it thunder? They didn't even necessarily hear it. And then maybe a voice from angels came, and Jesus says, you know what, that voice didn't come for me. It came for you who have storm-tossed lives. It didn't come for Jesus. It came to remind us who are wishing to see Jesus that God right now in your story is glorifying His name, and He will glorify it again, over and over and over again. Straight from the bowels of heaven itself. And go to the next slide. And actually go back to the last slide. One of the things Jesus is saying, He's saying to the troubled world, don't be afraid. We know in the book of John, from John 3:16, this is the world that He so loved. Jesus is saying, I came to save the world. That is my intention. This is what I came to do. And we should know that. If we weren't so busy treating the Bible like a textbook, as some systematic book, and more like a story, we would know that even in the beginning, in the very first story, even in the midst of sin and fallenness in the garden, God's first move was toward us. From Genesis on, His intention has always been to save. The whole story is about that. The whole of the Old Testament is about that. My intention is to save. My intention is to move towards you. You know, we can't even read the first few chapters right, because we actually think we are living in these lives. We are living these lives, and we're supposedly looking for God, and we actually think that God came and God is the one playing hide and seek from us. That's what we think. God, you're playing hide and seek. And he's saying throughout the story, no, I am not playing hide and seek. You're the ones that played hide and seek. I'm always the one coming looking for you. And you're always running because you're always saving your own story. You're always saving your own reputation. You're always saving your own relationships. You never see my glory because in the midst of your troubled lives, in the midst of your broken relationships, you never run to me. It's my intention to save. It has been from the beginning. Do you trust that? That truth was one of the most profound truths that changed my life. It actually came through counseling. I still go to counseling. My counselor looked at me, says, Brad, you're a preacher of the gospel. I've always been a preacher of grace. You get up every Sunday morning, you talk about the good news of Jesus Christ. You even say it is finished a lot. And then with words that were intenseful and more colorful, I will describe here. My counselor looked at me and said, Brad, Jesus saves. When are you blankety blank gonna let him? When are you gonna let him? I'd spent 10 years of my life trying to save and manage. There was nothing reckless about what I did. So if you're here, and I actually said it this morning, my kids say it to me every week. I hear Noah telling his friends at school. I heard Noah last year in the very intense baseball game, in a playoff game that was teetering in the balance with his teammates, saying to one of his teammates as he was going to bat at the high school baseball game, Jesus saves. You can't mess up this at bat. He saves whether you strike out. He saves whether you hit the run in. He saves. It's far beyond sports because Jesus saves Brad even when a poor decision is made. He truly saves. Sometimes if you come here long enough, you'll hear that. And you know what? When someone says that to me and someone says that to you, you know what we do? We actually get mad. You know, something's going wrong, something doesn't quite work, and you hear Jesus saves. You just shut up. The truth is, this isn't working right now. The mic doesn't work. I actually said it this morning. The mic doesn't work. It's frustrating. Can we get mics that work around here? All of those things. And we get frustrated and we get all of that. And to be able to say, it is the most freeing thing to say Jesus saves because he does. And he doesn't just save our souls, he's saving our lives. And he's saving the mics. And he's saving whatever game you're in. And he's saving music. And he's saving anything. He is just in the business of saving for his glory to be displayed. He is reckless. You know what we want to say when something's going wrong? And it seems so trite when someone comes up to you and says Jesus saves. You know what we're thinking? That is a reckless thing to say right now. How completely reckless. Don't you care about this? It may be reckless, but it is true. And whatever your heart is anxious about, that anxiety will never be eased by fixing the problem. It can be eased by the fact that Jesus saves whether the problem is ever fixed or not. Jesus is calling us to trust him in this passage. That's the hard part. What does dying look like? What does a recklessness look like? Well, to God, it doesn't look reckless at all. You know, one of the things I thought about in this, you know, when my kids were young, one of the first commitments I had, growing my kids up in Florida, if you have children, one of the first things you want to teach them to do when your kids grow up in Florida? Because everywhere you go, there's a pool. And I remember Christina, who's getting married next weekend. Oh, my word. I remember Christina, my oldest, and you've experienced this too. You're trying to teach them to swim, and you set them on the side of the pool, and you go back, and what do you say? Jump. Oh, I want to jump, Daddy. I don't want to jump. I don't want to jump. No, jump. Your daddy's here. Your daddy's here. Jump. I'm not going to drop you. I'm not going to drop you. Jump, jump, jump. And you're cajoling your children. What you're asking them to do is to trust. And you know what the most beautiful thing as a parent is that time when you get to the pool and you say jump, and she jumps. She jumps. You know what the gospel looks like? It's God teaching us and saying to us, jump, jump, jump. And in our minds, it looks so reckless. And you know why it looks so reckless to Tina? Because she just didn't quite trust her father. She just wasn't sure what was going to happen. And, you know, you may say, well, I've never done anything to destroy it, but it's just scary. It's scary to jump into the unknown. How much more so than our Heavenly Father who's telling us to jump? Because the beautiful thing is when we are in the air, you know all we have? It's trust. It's trust. And the other thing I've noticed, and guess what happened when Tina jumped into the pool and jumped into my arms? What did she want to do? She got out of the pool, and she jumped again. Now let's jump again. Let's jump again. Oh, I'm tired. No, I want to jump again, Daddy. Let's do the jump thing again. Daddy, let's do the jump again. That's what the Father loves us to do, to get over and jump again. And we don't know where we're going, and we don't know how we're jumping, but we know we have a Father who will catch us because he will, and he promised in the thundering voice that he would glorify us. That is what it means to die, to jump and not know where you're going to land. We won't jump unless we're sure we're going to land. That is not faith. Jesus plus nothing is everything.